But in situations like this, where a false
Yeah,
balance seems to be struck, it's quite dangerous.
Miss, I don't personally think there's any such thing as impartial journalism, but you must try and get as many perspectives as possible for the audience to make their decision as well. Thank you for helping us with that. I'm going to show our audience something here. This is a story that we ran with last November. There was anger over India's diplomat calling for the Israel model in Kashmir. And what he was doing was he was in the United States and he was talking about Jammu and Kashmir and how you get Kashmiri Hindus to get to go to that Union territory. And the language he was using was the language that many people who are Kashmiris are worried about, that somehow people are going to come in from outside of the region and change the culture, the nature of the region, and they call it a settler mentality. And here we have this Indian diplomat absolutely saying that out loud. This comment went viral. Let's have a look.
Because we already have a model in the world. I don't know why we don't follow it. It has happened in the Middle East. You have to look at if the Israeli people can do it, we can also do it. I think we should trust. I believe the security conditions in Jammu and Kashmir will improve. It will allow refugees to go back, and in your lifetime, you will be able to go back.
So it would be remiss of me if I didn't say, following that controversy, Sandeep Chakravorty said, I have seen some social media comments on my recent remarks. My remarks are being taken out of context. Safwan, let's give some more context here. The reason why the domicile law is so problematic for Kashmiris, I'm thinking about the impact on jobs, on the environment, on what are happening to Kashmiris who are already struggling. Can you talk to me about that?
Small phone.
A simple observation there because Kashmir has no private sector caucus and the government is actually the biggest employer. So in terms of employment, there is an issue there. But at the same time, when you are sort of giving citizenship to unbridled citizenship to people who have stayed here for some period of time, then you actually cutting the proportion of jobs for the local Kashmiris and basically disempowered economically. And secondly, when we talk about land, settlement of the land, Kashmir has only 30% of land inhabitable where people can stay, and there is already land crunch. So this will necessarily go into the economic, ecological destruction, and there will be a huge impact on the environment. And Kashmiris actually feel that. And at the same time, you have to look at the amount of land occupied by Indian paramilitary forces in Kashmir. I mean, it is there are like 6 lakh canals of land under their control, and we have seen recently there in North Kashmir's Baramulla district, we have seen army issuing notices to the government saying that like we want to purchase this land. I mean, this happened for the first time in the history that army actually saying that they want to own this land. Otherwise, they have just a temporary arrangement there. And I think it is going to set up a chain of reaction in a sense that because it is being if it's sold somewhere, a person sells it somewhere, then it's going to become a pattern. And eventually, the land is going to become much like how Israeli defense forces own land in Palestinian occupied territories.
I want to bring in Amit Reiner here, and I just want you, Mona, if you would just bounce off the back of him, because there's a very different feeling when you're outside of Jammu and Kashmir as to when you're in the rest of India. So Amit here is in New Delhi. This is what he told us. Let's have a listen.
We as an organization always demanded the application of Article 370 and 35A because we believe it was discriminatory against the rest of India. We believe that people of India have equal right on the state of Jammu and Kashmir, on the jobs that are being offered in Jammu and Kashmir, on the land in Jammu and Kashmir. We as an organization have always demanded one law, one constitution, one nation.
What would you say in response, Mona?
Yeah, I mean, So I mean, it's sort of ironic, right? That because if you look at the history of Article 370 and when and how it was instituted, it was a movement started by Kashmiri Pandits, the numeric minority in Kashmir, and at the time the slogan that was used by Kashmiri Pandits was Kashmir for Kashmir. And down with outsiders and so on and so forth. And you know, this sort of evolution of that slogan to Kashmir only for Kashmiris, or to, you know, Kashmiris for outsiders now, we have to understand the evolution of that movement within the context of what pundits, of course, recognize as an exodus or a departure, right, from the valley in 1989. I have to, I mean, this is such a complex topic, but I do want to make a quick sort of intervention here to help Kashmiri Pandits also recognize their own history in initiating these laws when it benefited them. Over time, what's of course happened is because Muslims are in a majority in the state, and rightfully, you know, the jobs and you know, land holdings, etc., should rightfully belong to the majority. That did not sit well with the minority community that was deeply privileged and deeply sort of ensconced in the structures of the state. So now, of course, it's something that is not a convenient, you know, a constitutional remnant to hang on to, and therefore this response. I do want to say, because we kind of got distracted from that earlier earlier YouTube clip that you saw, we didn't ever talked about what's happening is with organizations such as Roots in Kashmir. I think what the narrative that they've been pandering is that what we see in Kashmir is a clash of civilizations, right? It's Islamic civilization that has, for some reason over the years, you know, annihilated the Hindu civilization, and Kashmir rightfully belongs to Hindus and is a Hindu homeland, so to speak, or Himalayas are being reframed as the lost frontier of Hindutva politics. Now, I want to argue, and I've argued this enough, that this is precisely the logic, right, that shapes every intervention of the BJP since August 5th. It is essentially to exterminate Muslims of Kashmir from Kashmir. It's not just a demographic exercise, it's much beyond that. It's a way more dangerous exercise, and I think we have to come to terms with that and recognize it and name it for what it is.
If I can just add one more point over here.
Program. We are at the end of the program. There are no more points to be added in this particular section. But it's interesting, on YouTube, people are actually asking, why is the international community not doing more about what is happening in Kashmir? It's a story that we continue to go back to, and we will continue to do so. Mirza Sayeb, Mona, Safwa, thank you so much for being on the stream. It's a good point for me to actually say, come here, look at my laptop here. There is always more to discuss on the stream. So every day, Sunday through Wednesday at 16:30 GMT, we always have an Instagram live chat, takes us behind each episode, and you may even catch one of the guests from the main episode so we can talk to them a little bit more. Until the next time, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.
Frank assessments.
Tourism, that income stream is dead in the water. What's been the result of that?
We've seen poaching go up quite significantly.
And in-depth analysis of the day's global headlines. Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
Short films of hope and inspiration. Personal stories of people who are keeping the spirit of freedom alive by courageously defending their right to be heard. Al Jazeera selects.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello and welcome, I'm Peter Dobby. You're watching the News Hour live from our headquarters here in Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the World Trade Organization backs Qatar over Saudi Arabia, who are accused of blatantly pirating and broadcasting the BNTV sports network. Tensions high. North Korea destroys a liaison office shared with the South as relations continue to sour. Border tensions too between China and India. Troops clash over a disputed area in the Himalayas. An order to withdraw US forces from Germany. President Trump's argument with Berlin escalates.
And in sport, more reaction to that report from the World Trade Organization and whether it could end a Saudi-backed deal to buy English Premier League team Newcastle United.
Our top story, the World Trade Organization has issued a scathing legal judgment against Saudi Arabia over its pirate broadcasts of major sporting events. The WTO says the Saudi government knew about the piracy operations taking place at a channel called Be Out Q and actively promoted them. The operation involved intellectual property theft on a mass scale, not just from Qatari rights holders, but also FIFA, the Premier League, Formula One, the NBA, and more. Even so, the government did not take any criminal action against the channel over the course of 3 years, despite being provided with evidence from a range of companies and governments. Jamel El-Shael has the story.
It's been described as the biggest and most outrageous piracy operation in history, which has been allowed to continue for the past 3 years. But that might all change now after the World Trade Organization, one of the most important international bodies of jurisdiction, issued its findings into the case of Saudi Arabia and the theft of TV broadcasting rights. In 2017, shortly after the kingdom and 3 of its allies imposed a land, air and sea blockade on Qatar, a new television network was unveiled named Be Out Q. The new channel was nothing more than a piracy operation that stole the signal and output from beIN Sports, the Qatari-owned subscription-based sports and entertainment network, and rebroadcast it around the world. The largest global sporting events, including the 2018 FIFA World Cup, the English Premier League, tennis Grand Slams and Formula One, were all illegally broadcast by Be Out Q in a flagrant breach of intellectual property rights and several other international treaties. According to the World Trade Organization's independent investigation, Be Out Q was and is supported by the Saudi government. The report names Saud al-Qahtani, the so-called right-hand man of the kingdom's effective ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as being behind Be Out Q. The WTO also confirms that through government-owned entities such as Arabsat, Be Out Q was able to operate and transmit its signal, and that Saudi Arabia ignored numerous requests from the US and British governments and sporting bodies such as the Premier League and FIFA to put an end to the piracy.
The panel has reached a specific conclusion that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is in a breach of the WTO obligation for refusing to take any actions against the pirate Be Out Q. Not only that, but also actively promoting the Saudi-based broadcast of that pirate's Be Out Q.
The findings by the WTO do not come with any mechanism that will force Saudi Arabia to cease its piracy. But there is another ongoing legal case that might. Whereas the World Trade Organization's investigation was instigated by a request from Qatar's government, the beIN network has filed a separate $1 billion lawsuit.
beIN Sport as a Qatari company is pursuing its own legal actions against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in the form of an international arbitration. And to the extent of my knowledge, this arbitration is in its procedures, and this will be the platform for the beIN Sport to seek the compensation for the harm that happened to that company.
This case is important globally because aside from the theft of some of the most sought-after broadcasting television rights, Saudi Arabia is also trying to buy one of the largest and oldest football clubs in England, Newcastle United. That takeover is now hanging in the balance. Whilst the World Trade Organization may not have the power to force Saudi Arabia to shut down its piracy operation, its ruling is a very clear indictment that the kingdom is behind one of the largest thefts of intellectual property rights in history. Many will view this as yet another failure of Saudi Arabia's policies under the de facto rule of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Jamal Al-Shayyad, Al Jazeera, Doha.
Okay, let's get more on that for you. Joining us here on the News Hour is David Sugden. He is the legal counsel and director of corporate affairs for beIN Media Group. David Sugden, welcome to Al Jazeera. First off, can I just get your reaction to this ruling, please?
Of course, this is a major victory for intellectual property rights protection and a major victory for the international rule of law. Fundamentally, sport relies on protection of IP and international law and local law to protect its interests, and sadly for 3 years now every sports body's rights have been run roughshod over by Saudi Arabia, and this judgment emphatically says that.
Recourse should normally take place, I guess, in the courts in Saudi Arabia. Why didn't that happen?
Exactly right. Ordinarily, the natural home for these cases is in the jurisdiction where the crime is committed and the criminal is based. That, in this case, is Saudi Arabia and has been for 3 years. However, the government of Saudi Arabia, as proven by the WTO itself today, deliberately blocked any legal action from beIN Media Group, from not only beIN but every single major world football body in the world from bringing legal action to protect their intellectual property in Saudi Arabia. That was a very deliberate strategy to basically mean that no one can protect their rights. And as a result, you have to rely on international law, which is why this case was brought by Qatar at the WTO. And it has emphatically ruled in favour of international law and the protection of sports rights.
What are the main implications of this ruling for you if we view it through the prism of protecting intellectual property rights internationally, I mean, also combined with Saudi's aspirations, because they've got big, expensive, properly expensive aspirations when it comes to the game of soccer, the game of football in the UK?
Well, it's very hard to reconcile the two. If you don't protect intellectual property rights, then you can't participate on a world stage in sport. The two are interlinked. To be successful in sport as a country, as a team, as a football club, as a local community, you have to protect your interests, and particularly from a broadcast perspective and beIN's perspective, and Sky and others, you have to protect intellectual property. And the direct consequence of not doing so means that sport is poorer for it, because broadcast money contributes a significant amount of sports bodies' revenues, and if those broadcast feeds and rights can't be protected, that money dries up. And that goes directly to the Premier League, FIFA, UEFA, etc., and in turn to football clubs such as Newcastle. And so if you cut off the source of funding through illegality, the whole system falls apart, and that's what's at danger of happening here.
Will there be a sanction laid at the door of Saudi Arabia or not? Or will some sort of tariff only be imposed on Saudi Arabia if, or perhaps when, those aspirations they have, particularly when it comes to Newcastle United, end up going away? Because perhaps, just perhaps, that may not happen.
That's a question for Saudi Arabia, whether it wants to comply with international law. There are 164 member states that have agreed to sign up to these rules at the WTO, and it seems that one is very clearly not keen to follow them. The bigger implication is for world sport, because, as I said, given coronavirus, all kind of commercial revenues are drying up, and gate receipts are drying up because matches are behind closed doors. Sponsorship revenues are falling off a cliff. Sport is incredibly dependent on broadcast rights revenue and broadcast rights protection, and that's IP protection. And if you take that away, whether by a state actor or in any event, sports bodies will take action. That's what's happened here. This is not just a ruling for Qatar and BN. This is a major ruling for FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, Bundesliga, the AFC, and others, because it's a full endorsement that if you break the rules, rulings will be made to clamp down on that. So it's very much the ball's in Saudi Arabia's court.
Mr. Sugden, good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. The South Korean government has threatened to respond if Pyongyang continues to escalate tensions between Pyongyang and Seoul. North Korea blew up the liaison office it shared with the South in the border town of Kaesong. The US says it's in close contact with Seoul following the bombing. The office building had long been unoccupied. Tensions have been building for weeks. This latest development was prompted by defectors in South Korea sending balloons carrying political messages up over the border. The increasingly influential sister of the leader Kim Jong-un, Kim Yo-jong, previously warned the military would destroy the building if the defectors weren't stopped. Rob McBride begins our coverage now from Seoul.
The complete destruction of a building created at the height of improving inter-Korean relations, and with it, any immediate hope of reconciliation. The North has become enraged by defectors, whom it calls human scum, releasing propaganda balloons into its territory. Kim Yo-jong, the increasingly influential sister of leader Kim Jong-un, had warned the military could destroy the building in retaliation. And confirmation came Tuesday afternoon, with a faint plume of smoke spotted north of the border.
This corresponds to the mindset of an enraged people to force the human scum and those who have sheltered them to pay dearly for their crimes.
The Joint Liaison Office was established in 2018, amid the flurry of summit diplomacy between the two Koreas and between the North and the United States. Since then, all talks, including getting rid of the North's nuclear weapon threat, have stalled. By this action, North Korea seems set on creating a new crisis on the Korean peninsula. It's already cut the hotlines across the demilitarized zone border with the South, making any attempts at reconciliation far more difficult, and possibly signaling a return to the extreme tensions of the past. That's something the liberal South Korean President Moon Jae-in has wanted to avoid at all costs. But even his government seems to be returning to acrimonious warnings.
We sternly warn that we will strongly respond if the North continues to take steps to worsen the situation.
Adding that all responsibility for this destructive act falls on the North. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Our correspondent Alan Fisher joins us live now from outside the White House. Alan, what's the reaction like there in Washington?
Well, the National Security Council has said that they're in touch with their allies in South Korea. That's exactly what we expected them to say. There's been no reaction from the Pentagon or from the State Department or indeed from the President, but they are talking to their allies behind the scenes. That is almost certain. The North Koreans said that this was because of failed diplomacy. Now, you remember it was exactly 2 years ago this month that Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un met in Singapore for a summit that promised many things. Donald Trump believed that this was going to be a new era of diplomacy on the Korean peninsula, but unfortunately at the next summit in Vietnam, everything fell apart. Donald Trump pushed too hard with the Koreans to remove their nuclear weapons, to end their nuclear program, and Kim Jong-un decided to walk away. If this move was to try and get Donald Trump's attention, it's not going to be overly successful. He's got a lot on his plate at the moment. He's got the COVID crisis. He's got the economic fallout of the COVID crisis. He has got demonstrations across the country because of police brutality. And he, of course, has got an election to fight and to try and win in 5 months' time. He is not going to give a great deal of attention to something that is difficult, complex and complicated like diplomacy with North Korea. So it seems that the Americans are going to be watching what North Korea does next, but at the moment there's no official reaction from the White House.
Alan, thank you. Plenty more still to come for you here on the News Hour, including accusations of war crimes in Libya. Human Rights Watch says it has evidence against fighters loyal to the warlord Khalifa Haftar. The Human Rights Group calls for justice in a crackdown by security forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo between 2015 and 2018. And in the sports news, details of an important win off the pitch for this Premier League striker. Three Indian soldiers have been killed during fighting with Chinese troops on the border. It happened in the disputed Galwan Valley territory, where efforts to de-escalate tensions are now underway. Two countries have been locked in a standoff on the border for weeks. India's foreign ministry said on Tuesday the face-off was the result of an attempt by Beijing to, quote, unilaterally change the status quo there. Elizabeth Puranam has this update from New Delhi.
The Indian Army confirmed that an officer and two soldiers were killed in what they're calling a violent face-off on Monday night, and say that senior military officers from both sides are involved in talks in the location of Ladakh to try and defuse the situation. India's defense minister is also holding talks with the head of the army, and that's because what's happened is significant. While clashes along one of the world's longest disputed borders are common, this is the first death as a result of clashes in 45 years, and it happened as both sides were involved in de-escalation efforts after recent tensions on the border. They started in May when there were a series of clashes along the unofficial border. It's known as the Line of Actual Control, or LAC, where China accused India of trespassing on its territory, accused them of trying to build defense facilities. India always maintained that its troops were on its side. And after those skirmishes, we had both sides increasing their military presence in the region, and then both sides saying that they had a good relationship and that they had the diplomatic measures, the channels in place to resolve any border tensions through talks. Talks have been held for the past 10 days, and these deaths occurred despite those assurances from both sides that things were de-escalating. So now there are a lot of questions in India about whether the Indian army, about whether the Indian government has been completely honest about the situation along the border, how serious it's been, and whether they have it under control.
China says it will continue dialogue with India, but will not back down if tensions continue. Katrina Yu has more now from Beijing.
Well, the Chinese side has laid the blame for this altercation solely at the foot of India. Now, according to Zhao Lijian, who's this foreign ministry spokesperson here in Beijing, he said that because of these intensifying scuffles that have been taking place between China and India in recent months, that there have been de-escalating dialogues that have been taking place in the lead up to June. And he said on June 6th, a consensus between both sides was reached. Now, we also know that Chinese state media say that on that same day, Chinese military officers and weaponry were sent to the border to also conduct military exercises. Now, according to Zhao Lijian, on Monday, this consensus was broken by the Indian side. Let's have a listen.
What is shocking is that on June 15, the Indian troops seriously violated the consensus of the two sides, crossed the border illegally twice, and carried out provocative attacks on Chinese personnel, resulting in serious physical conflicts between the two border forces.
China has said that it's made firm representations to India. It's dismissed having any responsibility for this, and that it will continue peaceful dialogue. But at the same time, Chinese military spokespersons have often said that China will not back down from a fight if there is, in fact, any challenge to its sovereignty posed by India.
Human Rights Watch says it has found evidence of war crimes committed in Libya by fighters affiliated to the warlord Khalifa Haftar. Online video shows fighters torturing, killing, and desecrating the bodies of soldiers loyal to the government in Tripoli. The watchdog is calling on Haftar to hold his self-declared Libyan National Army accountable for the crimes. Let's speak now to Hanan Salah. She's a researcher specialising in Libya and Mauritania for Human Rights Watch. Hanan Salah, welcome to the News Hour. What do you want Khalifa Haftar to do now?
So we have seen over and over again over these past years incidents of extrajudicial executions, desecration of bodies of fighters, torture, all of them gleefully being presented in the social media by fighters affiliated with the Libyan National Army without any consequence. And this is a real problem. We have issued multiple reports. We have obviously every time put on note the senior leadership that they too can be held to account if they don't do anything about these violations, if they don't put an end to them, and certainly if they don't hold people to account. So what we really want is for these violations to stop. In the meantime, it would be good if the senior leadership recognizes the senior leadership of the Libyan, so-called Libyan National Army or Libyan Armed Forces would conduct an investigation and would at least remove people who are found to be responsible for serious human rights violations.
I think I'm right in saying we're talking here about at least 8 mass graves. Have your personnel been to those locations, or are you getting information from another source?
So just to be clear, that the 2 incidents that we reported about, the ones that were documented with the extrajudicial executions, the desecration and the torture of a detainee, these are not related or not apparently related to any of the reports of mass graves. To our information, there is currently no figure yet, no confirmed figure yet of people who have been found in these mass graves. And I also want to be clear that we do not know that there's only 8. There's probably more than that. And we also don't know when these mass graves were established. So it could be that they go back as far as 2017. And this really drives home the point that we have been making over and over again, that there is a real need for accountability for abuses in Libya. This country has slipped under the radar, and people have been going about their business with complete impunity. And I think the next real possibility for that is the UN Human Rights Council that is currently convening in Geneva that could establish an international fact-finding mission to document these violations and to identify those responsible for violations.
Is there something of a trend here? Because there were ICC arrest warrants issued, weren't there, in 2017 and 2018 from memory? I don't think they went anyplace though.
There is certainly a trend when it comes to abuses and when it comes to capturing abuses on camera. We know of the International Criminal Court has issued 2 arrest warrants against Mahmoud Al-Fali. He's a captain with the Libyan National Army, and he operates directly under Khalifa Haftar. He remains in his position. There has been no accountability, and we have not seen any attempt by the Libyan National Army to hand him over to the International Criminal Court. But what still needs to happen is the International Criminal Court has a mandate in Libya, and it's a very important mandate, and it's an underused mandate. It could be a deterrent for serious human rights abuses. So from my point of view, this is again an urgent call to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to take a good look at these videos that we are presenting, but also at other evidence out there, and to really hold to account all those who have committed serious human rights violations, and that include also the other party of the conflict, the Government of National Accord, and all fighters affiliated with them, because they're not exempt from any kind of future prosecution for war crimes.
Okay, Hanan Salah from Human Rights Watch, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The NATO chief says he's begun talks with US and Germany. That's after President Donald Trump ordered the withdrawal of 9,500 US soldiers from Germany. Mr. Trump has falsely accused the NATO ally of not paying its fair share of contributions to the alliance's budget.
Germany, as you know, is very delinquent in their payments to NATO. And they're paying 1%, and there's supposed to be a 2%, and the 2% is very low. It should be much more than that. So they're delinquent of billions of dollars, and this is for years delinquent. So we're removing we're putting the number down to 25,000 soldiers. We'll see what happens.
Well, the NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg, says it's not yet clear when the troops will be withdrawn, but it'll be high on the agenda for a forthcoming defence ministers' meeting. He says his message is clear.
I have spoken with the president, I have spoken with other representatives of the US administration, and I also spoken with the German defense minister, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. So this is now an ongoing dialogue on this issue, and my message is and remains to has been and remains to be the importance of North American, US, Canadian presence in Europe, because that binds Europe and North America together, and that's good for both Europe and North America.
Germany is the latest EU member to launch a contact tracing app because of coronavirus using Bluetooth that informs the public if they've come into contact with a COVID-19 positive person. Dominic Kane explains.
Germany has been praised around the world for its approach in combating the coronavirus, keeping the number of infections down, keeping the number of deaths down. In states around this country, the figures are low. Isolated outbreaks, but generally speaking, very low numbers, such as here, where I am right now, in the state of Schleswig-Holstein, in the north of the country. The mortality rate here is low. One of the tools that government ministers are particularly hoping will help them in the next stage of combating corona is an app that users and people can download onto their smartphone, which allows them anonymously to see information about whether they've been in close proximity to somebody who's gone on to test positive. Likewise, if a person tests positive, well, then they will upload the details of their positive test, which will be authenticated, and then that information can be sent on to other users of this app. That way, ministers hope that, as I say, it will be another tool take their coverage and their treatment of corona onto a different level.
The app can help to warn people who've been in contact with others who've been infected more quickly than has been possible up to now. Every extra hour to warn about the dangers of infection is a win in the fight against this virus.
One of the problems that the government has had with this app and bringing it out is privacy issues, that many people were concerned. Would the data that's gathered here really be anonymous? Could data protection be ensured? Ministers say, yes, it can. But the interesting thing is that surveys suggest that Germans are split down the middle on this. Around 40% yes, they say they will download this app, but around 40% say they won't. Ministers hope that in the course of the next few weeks and months, as the pandemic progresses, that many people will realise that they can use this app and it will give them a degree more safety. Certainly, that's what ministers hope.
Across the border, hospital workers in France have held protests in different cities up and down the country demanding better pay and an improved public health system. Police fired tear gas at demonstrators in Paris. French hospitals have been affected by budget cuts and many were overcrowded because of the pandemic. The government's been negotiating with medical representatives after the president, Emmanuel Macron, promised reforms. Still to come for you here on the News Hour. Cries of foul by the US and Venezuela's opposition leader as the government appoints what's considered an illegal electoral council. Desperate for food, Peruvians are forced to risk their lives amid strict virus restrictions. And in sport, encouraging signs of a return to the NFL for Colin Kaepernick. Andy's here with that story in about 20 minutes.
Hello, not much going on in the weather across the Middle East at the moment, largely fine, air dry, not too much in the way of cloud as well. A little bit of cloud down towards southern parts of Oman, southern areas of Yemen, but that's of a fair weather variety. I think we could say hot and dusty, that sums it up as per usual. We'll see quite a keen Shamal wind blowing in as we go through Wednesday on into Thursday, pegging the temperature back to around 39 Celsius here in Doha. Not particularly pleasant, as I said, the winds will be picking up somewhat as we go on through the next few days. Largely dry then, as you can see across the region. A few showers there into Turkey. Showers continuing meanwhile across Central Africa, as they should do, right across into the Gulf of Guinea. particularly heavy ones just around Cameroon, southern parts of Nigeria, easing over towards Ghana, Liberia, pushing up towards southern areas of Mali actually, and more to say as we go on through Thursday. That eastern side of Africa, on the other hand, a little drier than it has been recently. Chance of 1 or 2 coastal showers, but nothing much to speak of. Still a chance of some lively showers there into Uganda, maybe into western areas of Kenya. Eastern parts of Africa, just coming down into Madagascar and also into Mozambique. We'll see some wet weather there for eastern areas of South Africa.
Coveted beyond wealth, taken without hesitation, fought and died for. Power defines our world.
We should not have to trade our culture for oil and gas.
We live here. We make the rules.
Investigating, exposing, and questioning the use and abuse of power across the globe. People in Power returns to Al Jazeera.
The Brazilian journalist investigating a politically sanctioned land grab.
All the farmers helped get Bolsonaro elected, and he's repaid them.
That's empowering everyday people to profit from the destruction of the rainforest.
People are almost willing to give their life away to guarantee the occupation of the land.
Is journalism the last hope in the fight to save the Amazon?
This is not only a land conflict, but a conflict of narrative.
Brazil, the age of Bolsonaro. Whose truth is it anyway on Al Jazeera?
Let's just have a quick skip through your top stories today. The World Trade Organization has ruled against Saudi Arabia in its legal battle with Qatar over football broadcasting rights. The ruling says the Saudi government participated in intellectual property theft on a mass scale by allowing the pirate channel Be Out Q to operate. The US says it's in close coordination with its ally South Korea. That's after North Korea blew up a joint liaison office. Tensions escalated when defectors in South Korea sent political messages by balloon over the border. US President Donald Trump saying he'll sign an executive order on police reform later today. Donald Trump has hailed US law enforcement as, quote, mostly great people. He says the executive order will ensure reforms are fair, just and safe. Amnesty International is urging justice for hundreds of people killed in pro-democracy protests in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A new report by the human rights organization found Congolese security forces brutally and systematically cracked down on protesters, quote, between 2015 and 2018. They were opposing the president, Joseph Kabila's attempts to remain in power beyond his second constitutional term. By the end of 2018, at least 320 people were dead and 3,500 had been injured in the capital, Kinshasa. More than 8,000 arbitrary arrests and detentions were made in connection with the protests. Mohamed Ado reports now on one family's quest for justice.
2 years after the killing of his sister by Congolese police, Jean-Claude Kapangala is still seeking justice. Therese Kapangala, a novice nun, had joined protesters in the capital Kinshasa in January 2018, calling for former President Joseph Kabila to step down after the expiry of his second term. Police deployed to quell the protests cracked down with shootings, beatings and arrests. Therese was dead within minutes of being struck by a single round.
We feel completely abandoned by the authorities. Our only hope is to see the government on our side one day and our quest for justice. We've launched complaints several times asking for police officers and others responsible for the death of my sister to be brought to justice, but unfortunately, nothing has happened so far.
Presidential elections were finally held in December 2018 without Kabila on the ballot. The winner, Felix Tshisekedi, formed a coalition with Kabila's party to secure a majority in parliament. Despite his promises of real change, his administration is yet to act on repeated calls for the prosecution of those responsible for the killings of protesters.
As Minister of Justice, I haven't seen even a single file of a complaint from families of those killed during protests in the past.
I don't see how we, as government, can refuse to receive such complaints. We have no vested interests in turning down any such petition.
Amnesty International is calling on the Congolese president to live up to his promises and ensure justice for victims of police brutality. It's also calling for transparent investigations into serious human rights violations committed by security forces during the protests. For Jean-Claude Kapangala, his sister's loss has been made all the harder with the knowledge no one has been held accountable. He is vowing he won't give up the fight. Mohamed Ado, Al Jazeera.
The Saudi-led military coalition fighting in Yemen has been removed from a United Nations blacklist of warring parties that harm children in conflict. The decision came as a coalition airstrike hit a vehicle carrying civilians in northern Yemen on Monday. Houthi rebels say 4 children were among the dead. Save the Children says 13 people were killed. Rights groups have condemned the coalition's removal from the list. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, has more.
It comes out every year, and it's the list that no country wants to be on, the UN's list of the parties that are harming children in conflict zones, either killing or maiming children. The Saudi-led coalition has been on this list. This year it's been taken off the list. That's interesting because when you read the body of the report in the section of Yemen, it says that the worst offender are the Houthis, the second worst offender is the coalition, and the third worst, the government of Yemen. And yet only the Houthis and the government of Yemen are on the list. The Secretary General's special representative says that's because Saudi's been reducing the number of children that it harms, and it says that they are still going to be monitored going forward.
A continued United Nations monitoring and engagement period of 12 months will ensure the sustained implementation of the program of time-bound activities and the further decrease in the number of affected children as verified by the UN, failure of which would result in a relisting for the same violation in my next report.
You say failure, surely it's a failure this year when they've killed or maimed 222 children.
Because there still are some outstanding violations in this regard, the Secretary General has made it, and I think you will agree with me that it's the first time this language is utilized in the section 5 of the report, where a special monitoring mechanism was put in place for 12 months to assure the end and the completion of all the measures that have been agreed.
Human rights organisations, though, are not happy with that response. Human Rights Watch said, shame on the UN for removing the Saudi-led coalition from its list of shame.
The US president says he'll sign an executive order on police reform later today. Donald Trump says his order will ensure changes are fair, just and safe. It follows protests over the deaths of 2 African-American men in police custody. Here's Andy Gallagher.
As protests continue to gather pace across the nation, the family of Rayshard Brooks gave their first emotional press conference. The 27-year-old father of 3 died on Friday after he was shot twice in the back by a police officer. His death has been ruled a homicide. The officer who killed him has been fired, and his grieving family wants justice.
Because tomorrow we're going to have to deal with it again. We're going to have to bury him. We're going to have to say, we miss you. And if we didn't say we love you enough, we got to apologize to him for not telling him that we loved him that much.
Rayshard Brooks was killed 3 weeks after George Floyd died in Minneapolis, after an officer knelt on his neck for almost 9 minutes. Now, police forces across the US are promising major reforms to procedures, community policing, and their relationship with African Americans. In New York, the city's anti-crimes unit, comprising of around 600 police officers, will be reassigned. The unit was involved in the death of Eric Garner in 2014 and was responsible for a disproportionate number of shootings and complaints.
Make no mistake, this is a seismic shift in the culture of how the NYPD polices this great city. It will be felt immediately throughout the 5 district attorneys' offices. It will be felt immediately in the communities that we protect.
Despite his insistence that law and order must be enforced, President Trump says the death of Rayshard Brooks is concerning.
But it was a terrible situation. I studied it closely. I'm going to get some reports done today, very strong reports, and We'll have a little more to say about it tomorrow, but certainly to me, it was very disturbing.
On Tuesday, it's expected President Trump will sign an executive order aiming to improve police training, weeding out bad officers, and improving dealing with mental health issues. It's not expected his order will address systemic racism. Even as police reform appears to be sweeping the nation, those calling for change say it's not enough. Most of the changes involve procedures and not police accountability. Many want to see officers who carry out unjustified killings face justice, something that all too often doesn't happen. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera, Miami, Florida.
The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is accusing the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro of trying to rig the forthcoming election. The parliamentary vote is being overseen by a newly appointed electoral council that's dominated by Maduro loyalists. Mr. Pompeo says this was illegal. The opposition leader, Juan Guaido, has also condemned the move as a violation of the constitution. Let's talk now to Armando Armas. He's a Venezuelan lawyer and social activist. He's also president of the Permanent Commission for Foreign Policy, Sovereignty and Integration of Parliament. He joins us on Skype. He does not want us to tag his location. Armando Armas, welcome to the News Hour. What is wrong with this new electoral council?
Well, thank you very much, Peter. First of all, we have to be very clear about our main goal as a democratic movement is to have a free and fair general elections. So Venezuela is well known, but not known well. We are 3 times the size of Iraq, with 2/3 of Iraq population. 5 years ago, some people left with enough money to buy a home and escape to Europe and Latin America. And this is because of the political situation that created an economic and social decadence that we're undergoing nowadays. Now, when people cross the border, they escape with their homes on their backs. In a pre-pandemic world, approximately 280,000 people departed every week, most of whom are women.
Armando, I'm going to have to stop you there, for which I apologise. What you're saying is interesting and relevant, but not actually an answer to my question. My question was, what is wrong with the formation of and or how it's put together this new electoral council?
So yes, I wanted to address the question within a context. So the problem with the National Electoral Council is that it has to be, according to our constitution, is that it has to be appointed by the National Assembly. That's our rulings. That's our constitutional procedures. So because the the pro-democratic movement has the overwhelming majority of the population backing us, and as it was in 2015, and we won over 2/3 of the majority in Parliament. We are the ones who should be appointing according to the rulings of our Constitution, the Electoral Council. And what Maduro did was illegally appoint judges that have that ruled in favor of appoint in an unconstitutional way a new electoral council to have rigged elections, because all of them support the regime, basically.
Okay, I'm assuming here, therefore, that you don't accept the validity of the Electoral Council. If the Electoral Council was, broadly speaking, 50-50, if it was 50% people who would self-identify as backing Mr. Maduro and 50% people who would self-identify as backing Mr. Guaido, would that be okay for you?
So the Electoral Council is comprised by, like the National Electoral Council, the board, is comprised by five people, 5 persons. The discussions at the negotiation table in Dominican Republic and Barbados and in Norway was about to having this kind of composition, like the government would appoint, or the regime would appoint 2 members the opposition or the democratic movement will appoint 2 members, and between the 2 of them, will appoint a 5th member, which is validated for both parts. This was something that the democratic opposition proposed, and this was something that the regime was not able to take into consideration.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Armando Armas, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, has said the military would never remove him from power. He's being investigated over his possible interference in federal police appointments and is facing a number of impeachment proposals from Congress for his handling of the coronavirus pandemic.
Our armed forces, and I'm also of the military, we are truly responsible for democracy in our country. We will never follow absurd orders. We will also never accept a political judgment to ruin a democratically elected president. Another brutal interference of the Supreme Court in the executive. We cannot agree with that. I think that up to a point I have been patient and more than accommodating. I don't want to put my fist on the table nor confront anyone.
Latin America is the current epicenter of the virus pandemic, accounting for 1/5 of all cases around the world. Brazil is the 2nd worst affected country anywhere in the world, with more than 43,000 dead and nearly 900,000 confirmed cases. Chile has also emerged as a hotspot, where the death toll is quickly rising. More than 100 days after the first case of COVID-19 was reported, Peru has one of the highest infection rates across Latin America. The government established one of the first and strictest lockdown measures in the region. But desperation for food and money is forcing people to risk their lives. Mariana Sanchez reports now from Lima.
Patients are brought in as coffins are carried out. Across the country, hospitals are being pushed beyond their limits. It's what President Martín Vizcarra had hoped to avoid when he implemented one of the earliest and strictest lockdown measures in Latin America. And the rise of contagion is because of this. Staying at home is out of the question for more than 5 million poor Peruvians who can only live on what they earn each day. And they must go out for fresh food. Nearly half of Peruvians don't have a refrigerator.
We are dying of hunger. Our children have nothing to eat, and the president and mayor don't say anything. They only tell us to follow the rules, but the rules are against us.
In some districts, street vendors scramble daily to avoid police. A curfew added to other restrictions has left more than 2.3 million Peruvians jobless in the capital alone. Desperation is now fueling the contagion.
The great conglomerations in Lima are contributing to an increase of patients, but we must reactivate the economy and help those who need to work in an orderly way.
The pressure is on. Many are already operating with restrictions. The government's push to reopen the economy is leading to more traveling. People will not only have to take the risk of going to the markets, which have been the hotspots for contagion in the city. Now, to go to work, most will have to take a bus, and traveling in, the people are usually crammed up. And healthcare officials say that will likely increase the number of cases, putting an extra burden on the healthcare system.
We are in the battle for Lima. June will be the highest point. More than 65% of all beds are now dedicated to COVID.
When the pandemic began, there were fewer than 150 intensive care beds for Peru's 32 million people. Now the government says there are nearly 5,000, but that may still not be enough. 93-year-old Maximina Bosa was not accepted in any hospital because of her age and because there were not enough beds.
My mother could have died a month ago, but fortunately, a doctor came in the middle of the night to give us medicine.
The healthcare system continues to struggle. Officials say more than 6,500 Peruvians have died. Experts say the real number could be at least twice as much. While patients hope for a hospital bed, poor Peruvians are trying to...
Sana, 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 sana.
This is one I have never seen before. An RV stolen out of North.
Good. Good.
Definitely on this. If the water shot, you can see police right there on it.
picking